Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us today. It is our Millennial Roundtable. Nick Pitts is somewhere on the East Coast today. We kind of lost track of him. We saw a picture of him the other day in Fenway Park in Boston with a man that claimed to be a Babe Ruth impersonator. I think he's moved from Boston to New York, wherever he is right now. I'm sitting in, as I oftentimes do anyway, and we're going to spend some time today looking at a number of issues. First of all, of course, the issue of religious freedom. Why that? Well, the Supreme Court has now met once again. It is October, and that's when the sessions begin. And one of the first articles we've posted here is an article by our good friend John Stonestreet, who was on with us last week, Religious Freedom Cases Stacking Up. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Also, the House of Representatives passed the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act on the issue of abortion. We'll see if that goes anywhere in the United States Senate. And then you might imagine, as many people are talking about, of course, the tragedy in Las Vegas, but then the ongoing debate about guns and gun control and some of the conflict happening here. We always like to get some perspective from our Millennial Roundtable on that. And Chelsey is with us, as she oftentimes is, from First Liberty Institute. Grant is with us as well with the Initiative Network. And so, Chelsey, let's start off with religious freedom cases. The Supreme Court has met. This will be the first full session. Neil Gorsuch will be there. That's good news for religious liberty, isn't it?
That's very, very good news for religious liberty. I know that we were relieved with Gorsuch. He has a pretty good past and history. He's decided the HHS mandate cases. He was a part of some of the decisions there. So we do know he's very favorable towards religious liberty cases. The most notable religious liberty case, I think, that comes to all of our minds is the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, in which some Christian bakers opted to not participate in a same-sex wedding ceremony and attempted to not make the cake, essentially, for a same-sex wedding ceremony. Now, that holds a whole host of rights. There's expressive speech rights. There's artistic rights. So there's definitely a lot of speech rights as well as religious liberty rights in play when we're talking about that case. Now, we do still know that Justice Kennedy, sometimes he's our swing vote justice, as we like to refer to him, so you never really know which way he's going to vote, but we're hopeful he'll align with us. It'll definitely be the first time we see a direct conflict between religious liberty rights and sexual liberty rights at the Supreme Court. Well,
very interesting. Grant, one of the things that we talk about with millennials is they, in one respect, aren't as religious. So religious liberty is not kind of the top button issue like it is around this table. But at the same time, I think they sense fairness, and that is, okay, I would really like it if people would be cordial and gracious to my LGBT neighbors. But on the other hand, I have a little bit of angst about whether or not to force somebody to use their artistic talents to advance something. How do you come down on some of those issues?
Yeah, I do think that you're right that they are not that religious and or even involved in politics. I'm going to be straight up say that I'll wave a white flag. I probably represent the millennials that don't know. I'm over here writing down names while you're talking of like who these guys are.
Well, that's why we have both of you here.
Exactly, and
you need a policy geek, and you need somebody who's not so politically involved. Yeah. And this is perfect. Yes,
but I think that it is very important. A passion of mine is growing, is getting involved in these things, because I used to. Although many millennials aren't involved in politics, there is this desire to change the world, and this has even been a revelation for myself. If you want to change the world, you need to change where you live, and if you want to change where you live, you need to know what makes change in where you live. And so it's difficult, though, for, I think, a young adult to learn all these different names, structures. I like to also always share that I think sometimes politics is very divisive. Like if I choose this side, then I got to not like this side.
Right.
And so how to get educated, and then if you throw in fake news or where the source is, it makes it very difficult to learn. But I think it is important, and I am a testimony to in process of trying to grow in my knowledge of this, because I know that if I don't take it seriously and if my generation doesn't take it seriously, then there will be a time when the certain freedoms that we don't even realize are just luxuries, I guess, will not be as much of a luxury, and it'll be something we take for granted.
You know, this whole issue of LGBT rights, in some respects, millennials have said, well, this is kind of our civil rights issue. And Chelsey, speak to this for just a minute, because the way in which this surfaces is with public accommodation laws. Now, in the past, I grew up in Berkeley, California, but I had friends that actually marched in Selma. These were adults, but, you know, nevertheless, and they were hearing how public accommodation laws were used against African Americans. You know, you weren't allowed to sit at this particular lunch counter. You weren't allowed to sit in this particular place on the bus. We all buy that that was racist, it was segregation and the rest. But now public accommodation laws seem to be saying, you know, it doesn't matter if you're a Christian baker or a videographer, a photographer, whatever it might be. We are going to use those laws to force you to do something that really goes against your artistic abilities and even your own personally deeply held religious convictions.
Yes, Kerby, you know I could talk about this all day long, so humor me for a little bit. But I think it's important to note that these bakers, at least our bakers, we represent the clients out of Oregon who were fined with a $130,000 penalty for asking not to participate. They had served this couple before for an array of occasions, multiple occasions. So I think you have to take a step back and really, you know, do some analysis of this situation and say it's not a refusal to serve. That's not what we're talking about. It's the individual. It's a refusal to participate in a certain event that doesn't coincide with your religious beliefs. So in a similar vein, the clients, she had refused before to make divorce cakes, Halloween cakes, vulgar cakes for bachelorette parties. All of those go to the core of her religious beliefs. So I think it's important to know it might be less about the individual and person who she'd gladly and happily served before. She would have considered them definite repeat customers. She was on a friendly basis with them. To make a distinction there between a class of individuals versus participation in an event. But I'm just so glad you brought that up earlier, Grant, that I think if I could explain this to millennials in one foul swoop, it would be this. If you back up and you're not talking about the cake or the wedding or LGBT rights, if you back up, really the issues at play here go to the core of people's identities, and that is religious identities. The First Amendment protects your right to choose your truth, to believe that truth, and to speak to those truths, and then to associate with people in accordance with those beliefs and truths. And so this is fundamental to the core values of our country to say we have conscience protections, a history of conscience protections that I think our history is 25 pages long if you look at our amicus brief, of people saying, okay, now, you know, the right to abortion is now a constitutional right, but we don't force every doctor to perform an abortion. We don't force nurses to participate in abortions or pharmacists to provide, in some states, abortifacient drugs. Yeah. And so these conscience protections, they're really rooted at the core of who people are and their ability to live out their beliefs on a day-to-day basis.
You know, one of the other examples I've used in a commentary recently is Blaine Adamson. He was a T-shirt maker, and he was a Christian T-shirt maker, and he got into it because he thought, and this was his words, that a lot of Christian T-shirts were cheesy. I think both of you would agree with that. And so he had a really high standard. And so when he got in trouble for rejecting one that a homosexual group wanted to do, he said, no, wait a minute. I serve homosexuals. We have homosexuals in this staff. I just did a T-shirt the other day and some publicity for a group that has a lesbian speaker, but I didn't agree with that. And as a matter of fact, I rejected one that was a so-called Jesus T-shirt that had Jesus coming out of a bucket of chicken with chicken running out. You know, in other words, this had to do with artistic concerns, not bias. And so far, he's won in Kentucky on that. And I think that's the issue that a lot of people need to understand. So we'll come back and talk a little bit more about this. We also have, of course, some other issues on the table to discuss on our Millennial Roundtable. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, many universities have been using various regulations and excuses to restrict free speech on campus. What may surprise many Americans is the fact that so many millennials believe restricting free speech on campus is necessary. Nearly half of the millennials polled in a recent University of Chicago survey say that colleges should limit freedom of speech in extreme cases. This would include limiting what they perceive as offensive language or even costumes that stereotype certain racial and ethnic groups. Actually, the desire to restrict free speech goes beyond merely using university rules to prevent speakers on campus. Another study done by a professor at the University of California at Los Angeles found that 1/5 of undergraduates say that it is acceptable to use physical force to silence a speaker who makes offensive and hurtful statements. When students were asked whether the First Amendment protects hate speech, 4 in 10 said no. That is not correct. Why do so many college students believe that physical force can be used to stop free speech? One reason is their belief that speech is violence. If that is the case, then violence can be used to stop speech they believe is violent. Jonathan Haidt, in his book The Fragile Generation, laments what he calls concept creep. He argues that when a word like violence is allowed to creep so that it includes lots of things that are not violence, that causes what he calls a cascade of bad effects. One of those is the belief that people can use violence against certain types of free speech. Constitutional literacy about the First Amendment freedoms, coupled with a redefinition of words like violence, have given us a world where many college students willingly accept various attempts to restrict free speech. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Millennial Roundtable, and we'll just spend another minute or two on religious freedom, get into a couple of other issues. But the article that we've posted, it is one by John Stonestreet, and he does mention, of course, the T-shirt maker Blaine Adamson, also mentions the videographers, and then, of course, this case known as Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights. That is particularly, in some respects, very significant because how that one goes will determine, I think, Chelsey, how yours in Oregon goes, don't you think?
Yes, there's a high probability. Ours is in the Oregon state courts, but yes, definitely the Supreme Court ruling will have a fundamental bearing on the outcome of our case. So I know there's quite a few in the pipeline. You know, Obergefell was just passed in 2015. So at the grassroots level, many of these decisions are still preliminary to be decided.
Well, and again, this is Millennial Roundtable. For just a minute, let's just think about that, because what will be the future of religious liberty? This one, I think, could make the decision as to whether or not, even though you may have deeply held religious convictions about this, you will be forced by the government to set all of those aside and be forced into that. The implications could be it would be really difficult to be a Christian photographer, a Christian videographer, a Christian baker, a Christian T-shirt maker, a Christian individual that runs various kinds of lodging and venues for weddings and those kinds of things. Or it could simply say, no, we still believe that people have First Amendment rights, and that does not equate with public accommodation laws. So really what's at stake is how your generation will have how much freedom in the next couple of years in terms of their religious freedom. And we're not just about Christians. You know, Muslims are affected by this. Jews are affected by this. Hindus, Buddhists, all sorts of people, aren't they?
Yes, every single one of those religions has long held, sincerely held, sometimes millennia old religious views on marriage and unions. They're definitely part of a religious ceremony to people of different faiths. I think it's an interesting to note. There was a law review article published in the Texas Review of Law and Politics by Gerard Bradley, and it talks about the historical perspective of religious liberty in our country. And he mentioned that, yes, during the 1700s and 1800s, we do have a storied history for religious liberty in our country, but there were three predominant faiths that were specifically under attack, and there were really egregious violations. One would be Native American populations. Their children at times were taken away from them by government officials and sent to secular schools. The LDS population, the Mormon population out of Utah, was heavily discriminated against. And then the third would be Catholics, which a lot of us are aware of a lot of institutionalized past bills against those three groups. So if you look historically, there were really, really massive, clear violations against religious liberty. But what we're seeing now is what I would say just a broader spectrum. The very nature of religious liberty is being challenged, and it's all religious people groups. It is not just Christians, although Christians are obviously the predominant population and therefore probably have a higher number of these cases. But we're finding an entire perspective change in our country towards religious liberty, which has traditionally been considered a protected class. And I don't think that's something people talk about. You know, we have in the EEOC, you have language, you cannot discriminate on the basis of race, religion, national origin. It's up there with the protected classes. And so we're definitely surprised to see that these two different types of liberties are as at odds as they are today.
Grant, let me come to you, because one of the things we talk about is that you're millennial generation, the most diverse generation in American history. You have an incredible amount of diversity there at the Initiative Network and all the groups that you work with. On the one hand, diversity is something that we celebrate, but on the other hand, certain groups say, if you cannot affirm me as a person, if you cannot do what I ask you to do, then you are slighting me in some way. And so this is where the religious liberty and sexual ethics kind of come together, don't they?
Yeah. And it's interesting having diversity here in Dallas because interesting is I've been in Dallas since I was in kindergarten. And so that really shapes the culture of how I would see religious liberty.
Sure.
This is a city where if you meet someone, like me and Chelsey are meeting for the first time, I could easily say, hey, what's your name? What church do you go to? It's just an assumption. But if I ask someone, and I'm going to New York next week, I can't just assume, like, what's your name and what church do you go to?
Yeah.
And so when Christian, you get points for being a Christian. You lose points if you were to go up there and say, even assume that or say I am a Christian, because you're associating, unfortunately, with something as the culture is changing for our generation.
Mm-hmm.
You're really choosing to stand for values that, unfortunately, the culture is kind of not supporting anymore. And I've started to notice that. But where the red flag really changed for me was about 2 years ago. And that's when I've started to just become more educated. Like I've said, it's difficult. Like, how does one get educated on this, especially if you're kind of behind? But Francis Chan was here in town, and he was talking about, about 3,000 diverse millennials. And he was just saying, you guys do need to take this a little bit more seriously. He said, think about this. He says, I live in San Francisco. You guys are in Dallas. And he said, you guys here in Dallas, let me just tell you this. Although you may not see all the persecution that's coming for Christians or all the culture shifting as much here in Dallas, it is changing. He said, think of it this way. San Francisco is not becoming more like Dallas. Dallas is becoming more like San Francisco. And when I thought about it that way, I was like, yeah, that is true. Like, I don't think there's revivals happening in all these other places. I think there are pockets of it,
Sure.
But culturally, politically, there is becoming more where if you're a Christian, I think as my generation, and I do think we're ill-equipped for this, is need to be prepared for persecution and having those conversations, especially in diverse circles, like you said.
And again, I've noticed that. Of course, I grew up in California. In the next couple of weeks, I'll be in California, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska, all Western states, and not exactly, the hotbed of religious activity. And then every summer, I usually make my way to Vermont and New Hampshire there, and also as well New York. There are few people by percentage that go to church in Vermont than any other state. Yeah. Second is Oregon. So you can see the corner of the countries might be, again, an illustration of what the millennial generation looks like, because a very small percentage of millennials are Christians, which brings me back to something else. Chelsey, I remember when it used to be that you would go to like SMU and you would maybe look for interns or talk to law students, and you'd say you were in religious liberty decisions and you were dealing with religious freedom cases. They'd all treat it kind of like, oh, that's like civil rights law. Now, when you say that, it's kind of like, oh my goodness, you're one of those.
You're so right, Kerby. Yes, even a few years ago when I was at law school, it was considered to be constitutional law. I mean, it was exciting. It was civil rights. It's protecting the injustices across the country, something that was considered to be valued. And I would say, even at a recruiting event as early as last year, I said, I practice religious liberty law and free speech law, and the eyes get really big, and people either think it's a dirty word and kind of flee from your table, or people our interns, I will say, are so committed to our issues, because it's definitely, there's a winnowing out happening right now, and it's unfortunate. Religious liberty law, it has not always been this contentious. It used to be school rights oriented. It used to be establishment clause oriented. And so this is just the newest wave we're seeing of litigation, newest trend of litigation. But we have a book we publish at First Liberty Institute called Undeniable. You can go on our website and request it for free. And it really does just count the instances of religious hostility. And those numbers have almost doubled in the last 6-7 years. So it's really tremendous what we're seeing, the movement against, I would say, the religious identity of individuals as a whole, any faith. I mean, we represent any person of any faith, and across the board, this is definitely a trend.
And again, it has increased, which again goes back to the Francis Chan comment. I think, didn't Kelly say that it's like 130% higher than it was before? I've seen that book get bigger and bigger every single year. And so just a good illustration of what Francis Chan was talking about.
And I got a question. So why do you think, or how do you shift the opinion of young adults if they used to see it this way, and then now they view it this way with maybe like a negative image? I think the same thing with pro-life. Unfortunately, that is something that isn't just a political issue. It's a gospel issue. But young adults do. I was with Stand for Life, and I know that they're very intentional. They're so smart in making it not like they have to debunk a perception when they say what they stand for. They're even considering possibly changing the name because millennials see it a certain way. When it says Stand for Life, and they want to make it more neutral and inviting to this generation. I guess my question is, how do you win people over? Because the irony, millennials specifically, is that millennials are one of the most activist generations ever, but the two groups, like what you're doing and the church, I think is changing the world and very important, but millennials, at least Christian millennials, struggle with it.
Let's take a break. I want to hear her answer, but I'm coming up to one of those mandatory breaks. Yeah. And after the break, I do want to mention the fact that in the House of Representatives, speaking about pro-life issues, the Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Act passed. And so, again, the millennial generation is supposed to be the most pro-life generation in American history, but how they perceive that and how this would fit in with other European countries, because in France, for example, we have abortion heavily regulated after the 12th week. Even in Germany, after about 12 weeks, and Sweden 18 weeks, this would only regulate abortion after 20 weeks. We'll see where that takes us. But we've got some more to have some conversation about. And if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'd love to get your comments. And in just a few minutes, of course, we're going to get back to the tragedy in Las Vegas, the gun control debate, and many other issues. So all of it coming up right after these important messages.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some of those calls in just a minute. We'll be moving into the gun control debate. But first of all, we have around the round table Chelsey and Grant, and you have information about both of their organizations on the website. But Chelsey, you had a question from Grant, and it's a good one. It seems to me that when we look at people that support religious liberty, they tend to be my age, and I'm an old guy, right? You know, or a little bit younger. They tend to have no hair or gray hair or something like that. And you really need to mobilize, don't you, the younger generation to see how important this religious liberty issue is to them as well, don't you?
Well, if we want our religious liberty rights to last, yes, we have to. You know, it's really difficult. It is difficult for us to sometimes reach people of the millennial and younger generation because truly, I think to care about religious liberty and free speech, which I think are so fundamental to our core values as a country, you have to have that embedded in, you have to understand that's part of your heritage. That has to be a core value of our country. And I think that especially with the left media and the left resources and teaching and education that they have, that eventually they get inundated with leftist thinking on this front. And so we definitely, it's starting to become more countercultural to say religious freedom it's a good thing. It allows us to have views and express those views no matter what they are. You could say the sky's purple, and I would defend your right to believe that, even if you're crazy. But I think, you know, having them we have a fellowship every fall. You can look up the First Liberty Institute Fellowship. You can come and get educated. But we also have allied organizations who do really good work on this front. The Heritage Foundation is a great group and resource on, you know, that talks about our history and heritage as a country. And then obviously we have all of our online resources anyone can read up about. But we do speaking engagements. We go to universities that ask us to go. We gladly speak at symposiums because it's just so important to educate people on these issues.
When we get to the First Amendment, and this ties into my commentary today because the title of my commentary is Restricting Free Speech. And in there, it's one of the quotes that Nick Pitts and some of us have discussed before. The University of Chicago, in a survey, found that nearly half of all millennials say that colleges should limit freedom of speech. Well, again, for people that don't remember, the First Amendment not only is about freedom of religion, but freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, and the right to petition. Those are the 5 freedoms. But if we are in a time when your fellow millennials believe that we should restrict free speech, you can see how it would naturally fall that they think you should also restrict religious freedom, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're definitely seeing that this generation is the most anti-free speech generation that there's ever been. But you know that it honestly denigrates society as a whole. I mean, there's a reason that it's the first clause of the First Amendment in the Constitution, and that is that it's fundamental to a working cultural society to be able to have open dialogues, to discuss issues that are important to both sides of various factions in our country, and that leads to hopefully reap beneficial rewards as a society.
So, go ahead, Grant.
It's interesting. I was watching Donald Miller has written a couple of books, but he's also started to pursue marketing. Mm-hmm. And he does his big thing on marketing specifically to millennials. He says is you need to tell a story, and then you need to make your buyer, your client, feel like the hero. And I kind of feel like that may be a little bit of the case. Like he's cracked the code of with human trafficking. It's like you feel like the hero. Come and save these girls. Come and do this and be that person. When you say one of the most anti-religious liberty or freedom of speech, I'm thinking of like the kneeling and a lot of millennials speaking up and saying, no, they should be able to do that. But I do think maybe it's because the church has never been felt like a victim and the LGBT community has felt like a victim. So it's like they're getting to be the hero to speak on behalf of them, or the Black community, if there's for the persecution, being to be a vindicator, if you will. And so I think speaking on behalf of our liberties as the church has usually not been the victim. It's kind of been of the place of power, but that is changing. Does that make sense, kind of what I'm saying?
That makes a lot of sense, but I think it would be really helpful to have some human examples because our clients are very real victims. They've lost their jobs for their beliefs.
I'm not saying that's that I agree. I just think maybe there's something to like we want to be the hero, and these guys need saving or helping.
Yeah, you're right to expand on the human aspect of my job, and that is that I have people who can't get a job in the state of Oregon anymore because no one's willing to work with them because of their religious beliefs. Well, that's discrimination.
Yeah, sure is.
You know, there are definitely human aspects to this that I think you're right that, you know, typically you just have to take a step back and say, okay, what does this persecution really look like and amount to?
Well, if nothing else, this illustrates why we like to have First Liberty on the program and why we encourage you to support them. And I was just thinking, in light of victims, at least two of the clients that you are aware of, Eric Walsh and Kelvin Cochran, these are African-American Christians who have been persecuted. You would think that those would be perfect icons, perfect illustrations of people that have been double victimized, if you will. And yet, again, we have a society that goes, oh, I'm not so sure I really care about that. So this is one of the things that's going to have to be a messaging issue, don't you think?
Yes, and our churches in FEMA are a great example. We represent several houses of worship out of Houston who one was itself a shelter for victims of Hurricane Harvey until it was flooded. And they've lost everything. They've sustained millions of dollars of damage. And, you know, people are saying they don't deserve relief because they're religious entities and they're humans. I mean, these are human populations who serve their communities and are continuing to serve their communities in spite of. And I don't think it gets more clear than that.
I think a big part, is it's interesting. I never would have thought this was the direction we're going to go, but I do see this pattern of we've all been to Israel. We've both been to Israel, I know, a couple times, and it's the same thing over there. As I've gotten to know the Israeli people and the Palestinian people, just by simply going to Israel, I got so many people say, you're pro-Israel and you're this and that. I was like, I didn't realize so many people were against being pro-Israel. I'm like, it's in the Bible. And I'm just going. I'm visiting. That's it.
That's right.
But so many people started commenting on me just going to Israel. And they were talking about how they do this and this. And I just started seeing, man, the people that are doing a great job of marketing the victim, I guess, card, if you will, or just come and help us, was the Palestinians.
Yes.
And the Jewish people looked like the bad people. And anyway, I see that pattern of just wanting to be a hero, wanting to save. I'm not saying it's the right thing. I think millennials just, I don't know, they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, and maybe the other side, unfortunately, has done a good job of telling the story. Even when you say the story about with the cake and the masterpiece cake, I don't even really know the story of the family. I haven't heard that on the news much, but I have heard the story of the couple that didn't get to receive the cake. So the story's been told on the other side.
You're right. The story is told on, because it's easy to dehumanize your enemy. And we're seeing that with the left now and gun control. They're dehumanizing the right. And the truth is, the church, I mean, we could do a better job as the church of saying, we serve our communities, we care about people, we come from a loving place, and all we want to do is faithfully serve our God. And if you go on our website, firstliberty.org, and watch the Klein's interviews with us and our video footage, you'll see a family that just wants to be faithful in the only way they know how.
Yeah. Well, again, just an excellent discussion. Like you said, Grant didn't see this coming, but I think we actually maybe have solved another issue, messaging, and just how to get those stories out and have somebody become something bigger than their own. Just before we take a break, let me talk about this Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. This is something that has been passed in the previous sessions of Congress, but this time might have a chance, because if it can pass through the House, which it did, and pass through the Senate, which it may, I'm pretty sure that this president, unlike the previous president, will sign it. Now, I mentioned just a minute ago as we went to the break that this would still only prevent abortions after 20 weeks. And the argument is that unborn children have enough sensory apparatus that they feel pain after 20 weeks. This would only begin to bring us in line with other European countries, because in France, for example, that has strict regulations after the 12th week, not the 20th week. When you go to Sweden, after 18 weeks, Germany after 12 weeks. And again, this is one of those issues that I think millennials generally tend to be more pro-life than the rest of the population.
Mm-hmm. What's more human than babies? If you think about it, they're definitely the vulnerable in our society. And I think that innately, people do sense that they're worthy of protection and human dignity, so.
Yeah, and Stand for Life, I know they recognize that this is one place where even if you can't outlaw all abortions, even people, Grant, that are pro-choice say, when I see a sonogram after 20 weeks, this looks like a baby inside the womb. So this is one place where I think technology helps you out.
Yeah, and I love, there's been a shift in I'm a marketing guy. A lot of times I realize, I guess, is
yes, you're good at that.
Just how to market the right message so people see the full picture and not just one side. And I think there's been a change, even in human trafficking and in abortion, where it used to be kind of scaring people and like even showing dark pictures of girls in chains, which is a reality. So you don't want to neglect the real, like, scary truth, but getting people to realize the beauty of life instead of just the guilt of killing innocent children. And so I love that Stand for Life does that really well. And I think that's something millennials like. I want a child to be able to have a full and beautiful life and that they've been created in God's image.
Yes, and you have more pregnancy resource centers in America than you have abortion clinics in America, so that's another positive. Well, let's come back and talk about Las Vegas and certainly gun control. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Maria Nolan and St. Anne Catholic School had a falling out. Nolan thinks her religious employer fired her from her job as principal of the school for speaking out against what she viewed as racial discrimination. The Diocese of Birmingham, Alabama, that operates St. Anne's, said that Nolan simply wasn't the right person to advance their religious mission. Nolan's responsibilities were pretty clear. As principal, she was responsible for implementing an educational atmosphere charged with the Catholic beliefs of her employer. That included monitoring lesson plans to make sure the teaching of the church was reflected in the lessons of the classroom, leading school prayers, and organizing religious activities for the students and the faculty. The court quickly determined that there was little doubt that Nolan's role as principal falls within the general ambit of the ministerial exception. Although she lacked the formal title of minister, her role clearly conveyed the church's message and carried out its mission. Therefore, the court could not interfere with what amounts to a decision by a religious body as to who best perpetuates its religious message and mission. The ministerial exception is an important doctrine that protects the unique aspects of a religious employer, giving relief to religious organizations from the rigors of employment law that may hamper their unique religious mission. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, of course, those of you that have been listening to this program know that we spent a little bit of time over the last couple of days talking about what happened in Las Vegas. And I want to broaden it a little bit because obviously today we're going to get into a little bit of the questions about gun control and crime. And this piece that came out the other day I thought was very well said. What do they call 59 deaths in Chicago? September. Because that's exactly how many people died of murder deaths in Chicago in September. Of course, you have 59 in August, 76 in July, 84 in June. In other words, because this happens all at once in one shooter, we tend to focus just on that particular one. And we all know the names, Columbine, Sandy Hook. We can go all the way through the long list, all the way up to Las Vegas. But I hope as we get into this conversation a little bit, we would look beyond that and recognize that as the second article, or I guess it's a third article we've posted here, dealt with Jimmy Kimmel. Now, Jimmy Kimmel is a comedian, although you wouldn't know it when you watched the monologue the other night, in which he went on, I think it'd be fair to say, a rant against Republicans and on the whole issue of gun control. One of the things that people like to say is, well, is there another side? That's kind of what Grant's asking sometimes. And this particular piece by David French, or there's some other ones that have been out as well on Breitbart and others, point out that just a lot of misinformation out there. So when we come to the conversation, it would be good if at least we could have some factual pieces of information. And this one in particular talks about some of the misinformation in terms of the fact that, for example, he mentioned Orlando, Newtown, Aurora, San Bernardino, and then said murderers used automatic weapons and semi-automatic weapons. Well, no, they all use semi-automatic weapons. And so those kinds of questions are up and to be discussed. Also talks about what's called a gun show loophole, and if I've seen it once, I've seen it dozens of times, saying there is no loophole in the law. But nevertheless, those get to be the talking points. But before we get into the specifics, I'd like to just go around the roundtable, because, again, millennials watching this are going to be saying, well, we need to do something, and maybe we can pass some more legislation, but the conflict and one of the pieces I posted here, the tribal politics, sort of gets in the way. Grant, what are your thoughts about that?
Man, I don't know if I'm actually a good place to start. Honestly, even with watching that Jimmy Kimmel thing, there's just shooting after shooting. And it's like so many different conversations that I don't know if I've really processed the whole thing. Like, I didn't even realize until getting invited on the show how quickly I didn't know that shootings automatically meant there needs to be discussions about gun rights. Like, because I felt like I've started YouTubing the shooting, and it was always news on gun rights. And I was like, I'm trying to find out like what's going on with the actual story.
Can we set that aside for like 5 days? I think, and that's a typical millennial reaction. Why are we even talking about this when their body's still out on the streets? That a fair question? Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's part of the issue. I think a generation that says, look, I'm not that political anyway, and then every time something like this happens, we go first to the political issues. I mean, one of the first tweets came from Hillary Clinton about gun rights and NRA. And I would think that some of your people in your generation would just be going, how did this even develop? You know,
I mean,
why
even
are we
in
having this conversation?
Jimmy Kimmel video, I'm like, wow. I'm watching the first 2 minutes, and I'm like, I've never seen Jimmy Kimmel like break down and kind of crying. And he's he's humanized it in a way that actually maybe one of the best ways I've seen someone humanize the story, because you don't get that in the news as much. It's very factual, but it's very not factual. Here's a parent, a teacher, they're really talking about their lives. And then I didn't even expect for it like took a 180 switch and then went into gun rights. And so this is kind of new to me, and I think for millennials to see that it's almost like, okay, now let's use this as a huge talking point.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Well, my first thought is it's unfortunate, because I think that there are a lot of people really hurting. They've lost family members. I mean, as a country, we're all affected by this. They're fellow Americans that were brutally gunned down and victimized, and that has to be acknowledged. Obviously, it's very natural for us to react with, we have to blame someone and fix it. I mean, that's a natural human reaction, but the issue is we can't blame each other. And, I think the first group that was blamed after Orlando were Christian conservatives. Yeah. I remember it was a Muslim incident, but for some reason, Christian conservatives were, because of the nature of the gay nightclub they were at, we were the first to be blamed. And so it's unfortunate, because the truth is evil is to blame. This was an evil person. It was a demented person. And I think that it's really divisive to the healing and the grieving process of our country to immediately start casting this very evil blame on one another. We can have a gun rights discussion. There are a lot of facts on a lot of sites, a lot of statistics out there as to what is actually beneficial, what's not. I think it's interesting to know, if we're going down that route, that violent crime by guns is 1/7 of all violent crimes. And it's been decreasing systematically since 2007. although gun ownership has increased systematically since the Obama administration took place in 2007. So about 48% of Americans own guns. And with that increase in ownership, there's been a decrease in violence. And so if we're going to have the gun conversation, let's use numbers, let's use facts and statistics. I just didn't think that the day of or the day after was the time to have a policy discussion.
I might just mention, too, since some of those facts and figures come flying across your ears and you're wondering, can I find some of that? One of the things I posted yesterday was that graph that had appeared a number of years ago in the American Enterprise Institute, in which it compared 2003 to 2013. And what you see is gun ownership has gone up more than 50%. And gun violence has gone down almost that same percentage. And so you can at least see the graph because you've heard people mention that before. Then you start looking at some of those numbers when you talk about people that are killed by guns. 2/3 of those are through suicides. So when people say, what are we going to do? Well, let's see if we can not talk about the guns. Let's talk about the people holding them that kill themselves. Maybe that's mental health involvement. Some people say, well, yeah, but some young people get hold of guns because the second category of those are sort of young people killing other young people. I just mentioned Chicago a minute ago. A high percentage of those are millennials, by the way. So can we do a better job, for example, with background checks? Right now, background checks only check some databases. Now, the other day when I bought something, they did a credit check on me. Within a minute, they had it, and they knew it was right. When we do background checks, we're not sure we still have all the data. So there's a place where we could work. And, of course, we could also talk about the fact that there are some people purchasing guns who are not actually going to own the guns. Those are what are called straw purchases. Well, we could tighten that up. Those are all really important things we could do, but it's not the same as saying we need to pass a piece of legislation in the House of Congress right now. That's
right.
Not quite as sexy, if you will.
Right. And it's difficult in this instance because the gunman, check. Yeah. Background checks passed up, no criminal history or record, no psychological history or record. He just came out of nowhere. And I think it's really hard in a country our size to prevent everything. I know ISIS has claimed responsibility now for this attack 4 times. They're really doubling down on claiming responsibility. The FBI did say, they had no proof of that. But it'll be interesting as they start to dig into more, what the motive actually was. But I think it's going to be really hard to prevent wholesale any issues like this from arising in a country as big as ours.
And I think David French points that out at the very end, or maybe it was in one of the other articles I read, that in order to do even some of the things that Jimmy Kimmel's talking about, you simply cannot ban the kinds of weapons used in mass murders, if you look at all the ones that have taken place, without effectively repealing the Second Amendment. It's that simple. So he goes through that. It's one of the other articles we posted because, as we've talked about, we're always looking for information. And so we're going to come back and take some phone calls because we do have a bank of phone calls. We'll get some of your comments on everything from abortion to gun control. So the second hour will be, again, an opportunity to hear from our millennial opportunities around the table here. But if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
At dinner recently, I was struck by the couple in front of me. They were allegedly spending a night out together, but the only time they communicated in a half hour was one time when the man showed what was on his phone to the woman, and then back to their own screens. We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You'll find us online with your phone, your tablet, your laptop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues. You can also follow our new YouTube video series, Uncensored. Stay informed. Follow us on Twitter at Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Again, at Point of View RTS. We'd love you to retweet us, to share our Facebook posts, but please don't do it when you're out with your family or someone you love. We can wait. We're online 24 hours a day. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Almost all the lines are full, but as the caller drops off, of course, there's still room for you, but there, again, as they fill up, and they will, you can certainly join us as a caller drops off. We have Chelsey and Grant with us once again, and again, they're with respectively, First Liberty Institute and the Initiative Network, and we have information about them on our website. We've talked in the first hour, in case you just joined us, on everything from abortion, in part because of a very good piece of legislation called the Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. So I want to take a call on that. Then, of course, we've been talking about the issue of gun control and the tragedy in Las Vegas. We've learned a little bit more about those individuals. I'll share some of that as we go along. And we've posted a lot of articles, the non-sequiturs of the gun debate, gun control and crime, Jimmy Kimmel and guns and tribal politics. An earlier one we also posted from Breakpoint on religious freedom cases stacking up. So we have a lot that we have covered. Since we talked about abortion, let me take this call. First of all, in Georgia, WPWB. Jeannie, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, I just wanted to make one comment to start with, that I think your information talk show is the best on the radio, bar none, secular or Christian.
Well, that's pretty good. I might as well just stop right now. No,
and I wanted to see if you had heard of another bill that's even better than the unborn pain awareness bill. It's called the Heartbeat Bill, number H.R. 490. Have you heard of it?
Yes, H.R. 490. What this does is, and it's something I've used before in debates. I remember years ago we did a debate at SMU, and I've done some debates. Matter of fact, I did a debate with a leading abortionist in Arkansas, and the argument we make is this. The cessation of heartbeat oftentimes has been used for the definition of death. Now we use cessation, sometimes brainwave activity, but yeah, that's usually used lots of times. If a heartbeat stops, you're dead. Well, could we use the onset of heartbeat to define life? Well, that happens very early on in a pregnancy, and so once you are able to determine a heartbeat, this would outlaw even more abortions. The one I mentioned a minute ago, the Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, really would outlaw abortions after 20 weeks or severely restrict them. They still have the disclaimers for rape, incest, and the threat to the life of the mother. But the heartbeat bill would go even further back and eliminate even more abortions. That one's going to be tougher to sell. That would be tougher to pass. So let's see how the Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Act goes. But it's one that has some potential of maybe making it out of the House of Representatives. I'm not sure it has a chance in the United States Senate. So that's just another way to begin to restrict abortion. And so, Jeannie, I appreciate you reminding us of that, H.R. 490, the heartbeat bill.
Yes, exactly. And it would, the heartbeat is detectable between 6 and 8 weeks. So you can see that would protect thousands more preborn babies.
There are some women that maybe, and I've got a mom here, that don't even necessarily hear the heartbeat early on, don't even know that. So this essentially would almost outlaw almost all abortions. And a lot of this is done, since I got my legal expert here, in the cases of Roe versus Wade, because the Supreme Court basically said that there could be a compelling state interest to regulate third trimester abortions. The argument now is that this pain issue could be used to also eliminate a lot of abortions. So this isn't overturning Roe versus Wade. It's just using some of the freedom written into the decision by Harry Blackmun to begin to eliminate some abortions.
Yes, and there was another abortion case in the 90s, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, in which Sandra Day O'Connor wrote the majority opinion, and everyone thought that was going to be overturning Roe versus Wade. Unfortunately, it did not. But they did acknowledge that children have rights, women have rights, and you have to cast a balance between both the unborn child and the women's rights. They also said that as science and technology change over the years with more information, you can go back and reevaluate the decision and the standards for abortions under those. And I think that obviously technology and science has changed immensely. I mean, now we know that the unborn have pain at certain weeks. They can detect faces from inside the womb in certain lighting at certain ages inside the womb. So, technological advances have really moved the ball on this. And I would obviously love to see that go before the Supreme Court again someday.
Well, and you probably had a sonogram when you were carrying Foster, right? And boy, that really helps you understand that you've got a child in there. Of course, this in abortion clinics, if they use a sonogram, sometimes because they're using in late-term abortions, they want to figure out where the fetus is, they will make sure they turn the monitor away from the mother, because you know as well as I do, if you go to a lot of these pregnancy center banquets, and I've spoken at probably more than anybody that I know, other than maybe some of the leading pro-life people, these sonograms just change the minds of abortion-minded women almost instantaneously when they see their baby in the womb.
Yes. There's even, I think in town here in Dallas, we have one organization that's called the Sonogram Bus, and they just post up outside of abortion clinics, and they have found, I think it was 70% of the time a woman would come in and get a sonogram, she would keep the baby. Tremendously effective, because truly medical knowledge is important. Those women need to know medically what they're dealing with. That's an educated decision for both.
Grant, I just think, again, this is one of the reasons why the millennial generation is more pro-life, because, first of all, technology. You've seen BBC and National Geographic videos. We've had sonograms, as well as just a justice issue, and that is, you aborted my potential son, my brother or sister when I was young, and that doesn't seem right. And so for a lot of reasons, the millennial generation is one of the most pro-life generations ever.
Yeah, kind of actually going back to that idea of, I don't like the idea of millennials wanting to be a hero. I do think I like to look at it as where does Jesus' heart, when breaks Jesus' heart, what does God care about? And I do think he cares when people made in his image are hurt and or murdered. And so I think this is one of those areas where millennials can step in and, instead of running away, can go and try to be a part of redeeming the image of man. I do have a dream, and I know I've actually seen there's a group that's kind of forming called the AND campaign, and I think it's for young adults that feel like it's hard to pick one side or the other, because there are values on both sides, if you will, Democrat or Republican, that are Christian, if you will. Like caring about the poor is a Christian value, and caring about pro-life is a Christian value, but sometimes those are like seen on other sides. And I would love and even again, Stand for Life coming up again, as we've talked about, maybe what does it look like to stand for life of all? I think they said from the womb into the tomb. No matter what color you are, no matter what background you have, and no matter what age you are in the womb, that you are made in the image of God.
Yeah. Let's take a break. When we come back, we will get into some of the questions about gun control. And, of course, a lot of questions about what can we do. And one of the things that surfaced just the other day was this whole idea, if you see something, say something. You go through this long list. There were some real concerns about the Virginia Tech shooter, about the fact they were trying to explain concerns to the police. Aurora, Colorado, the psychiatrist even contacted the police. And in this particular case, the shooter sends his girlfriend to the Philippines and said she didn't even know that she was going to the Philippines until he said to her, "I found you a cheap ticket to the Philippines." How often do you send your significant others out of the country? We may learn a little bit more when the law enforcement officers talk to her, but we'll come back and take your calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, many universities have been using various regulations and excuses to restrict free speech on campus. What may surprise many Americans is the fact that so many millennials believe restricting free speech on campus is necessary. Nearly half of the millennials polled in a recent University of Chicago survey say that colleges should limit freedom of speech in extreme cases. This would include limiting what they perceive as offensive language or even costumes that stereotype certain racial and ethnic groups. Actually, the desire to restrict free speech goes beyond merely using university rules to prevent speakers on campus. Another study done by a professor at the University of California at Los Angeles found that 1/5 of undergraduates say that it is acceptable to use physical force to silence a speaker who makes offensive and hurtful statements. When students were asked whether the First Amendment protects hate speech, 4 in 10 said no. That is not correct. Why do so many college students believe that physical force can be used to stop free speech? One reason is their belief that speech is violence. If that is the case, then violence can be used to stop speech they believe is violent. Jonathan Haidt, in his book The Fragile Generation, laments what he calls concept creep. He argues that when a word like violence is allowed to creep so that it includes lots of things that are not violence, that causes what he calls a cascade of bad effects. One of those is the belief that people can use violence against certain types of free speech. Constitutional literacy about the First Amendment freedoms, coupled with a redefinition of words like violence, have given us a world where many college students willingly accept various attempts to restrict free speech. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Grant and Chelsey in studio with us today. And again, you can find out a little bit more about the Initiative Network and First Liberty on our website, pointofview.net. Before we're done, we'll talk about what is available on their websites, because this is our Millennial Roundtable. Let's take some phone calls, though. We'll go to Georgia on the Good News Network. Jonathan, thank you for calling today. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call. I really appreciate your program. I agree with, I think her name was Jeannie or Jenny. I agree with her. Your show is, bar none, is the best.
Well, that's very good. I
I
appreciate that, and I appreciate her kind comments and yours as well. So what would you like to share with us today?
Well, earlier in the show, you offered a question that said, what would be the solution for...
Yes, okay, good.
What would be the solution for gun control, kind of? What would be the best way to a preventative measure for something that just happened in Las Vegas or any of the other mass shootings? And personally, I've thought about this for a while. I personally don't know all the details from the Las Vegas shooting. I've been kind of waiting to get all the real facts before. It's just a lot of speculation. But regardless. I believe that the solution to preventing something like that isn't more legislation or gun control or rules or any of the such, because when it comes down to it, if even with the current laws, I live in Georgia, a very pro-gun state, but criminals can still get guns. They don't follow the rules. That's why they're criminals, right? So the solution isn't rules, because those who want to do bad are going to do bad, and it kind of comes back to me. Kind of goes to the human heart. Reminded of Jeremiah 17:9, I believe, heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? So, the answer isn't more control. I believe it starts with the human heart, and the only way to do that is, for the church to be more effective and that kind of stuff. Not saying that they're not. It's just,
Well, again, one of the things we talked about earlier in the week, and I want to go around the roundtable here as well, I had a pastor call in and say, in a society where it's moving more towards a secular view, where there's no right or wrong, there's no good or bad, where we don't even want to use the word evil because that has kind of this idea of some absolute values. When we're moving towards kind of nihilism, if you want to use one of those big words, and when we recognize as Christians that there's a spiritual battle, that we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers, it does seem to me, Chelsey, that dealing with the human heart, certainly praying, and in just a minute I'm going to get into some who say, well, when we say our thoughts and prayers, that's just kind of, mindless statements. But I think there is some truth to the fact we should pray for this country. We should pray for revival. We should try to bring about some kind of healing. And if we could have met this individual who is the shooter and shared the gospel with him, and if he had become a Christian, and it says in 2 Corinthians 5:17, he becomes a new creature, we wouldn't be talking about this today, would we?
Right. We were talking even in our office earlier today that he fits the definition from the limited knowledge we have of someone who's adheres to nihilism, no religion, no politics, no policy, no hope, nothing really to hope in or stand for. It's depressing. And when someone is in that place, you never know, the kind of evil that is allowed to just take over someone in that situation. And I think that we can't prevent all evil. We know in this world that there will be evil, but that God has overcome the world. And so we as Christians do have a higher hope, and hopefully we'll take care of people in this time of mourning.
Yes. And granted, again, this is an opportunity for the church. It's an opportunity for the body of Christ, isn't it? To reach out and to bring healing and to bring hope in a generation, in a whole culture, in a society right now that seems to have lost any kind of hope.
Yeah, I think that maybe it might be an ideal world, but I do think it is biblical. I think that it looks like Jesus, and it is countercultural, is if immediately after a shooting, there's a party that wants to, or a group of people that wants to go to fighting and or making cases of just taking a heart of repentance and mourning. And I think I always think of the verse like, how can we as Christians get better at being wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove? And I think that Jesus had that posture where it doesn't mean not standing for anything, because Jesus was very tactful, but he did stand for things too. Like there's a reason why Jesus would say, blessed are those. It's like the most unquoted beatitude, if you will, or blessed are those. Jesus said, red letter, blessed are those who are not offended by me. Yeah. And so he said things that he knew people wouldn't agree with, but he did it in a way that wasn't just trying to make a point, but it also made a difference. And I think a lot of times we do the same thing that the other side does. We just go and try to make our point, and we make that point with our side, but we don't make a difference on winning people over. And so I think it's hard to dislike or passionately disagree with someone that's asking for us to, let's mourn and there's maybe something we could do better, but not trying to clash and fight. And then once there is that humanizing of each other, then there's a time to, now let's make some points and let's do something. Anyway, that may be ideal world and not realistic, but I think that it looks like Jesus to do that. Is to mourn and then to respond.
And it seems to me that Jesus had to address those issues too, because there were a couple of times in his earthly ministry where there had been an evil. A tower falls on individuals, and the disciples ask, okay, who sinned?
Yeah.
And instead of answering the question, he says, well, now you need to repent. And so there's a sense in which he really just changes the conversation from the one that everybody wants to have, the kind of conversation that would take place on a talk show or even in a religious forum, but instead brings us back to some of those fundamental issues.
I mean, how many times does it seem like a group of people are trying to get his take on a very controversial topic, and then he makes it all like, oh, now you make me feel like I have done something. He always makes it then like, what can we all repent of personally? In whatever creative way that he does it, like I said, he's very tactful, but he's innocent. He makes points while still making a difference. They never felt like he just made a point and won his own side over. He won people over that, like Nicodemus and stuff, that after time, and it's not right away, but over time, people have those conversations. I think even us have shared. People come around later and say, hey, I do kind of agree with what you said, or I've never heard it said that way. I think that happens when you have a different type of posture sometimes.
That certainly is the case. Let's go to Ohio, and we'll talk to Stephen. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, sir. I just want to say I enjoy listening to your show every day, and my comment is kind of along the lines of the last gentleman you just spoke to. More rules aren't going to help gun control because they have plenty of rules in for drugs, and like people die of heroin and other overdoses every day, and it just shows that, like he was saying, that people want something, they're going to have it, and it's normally going to be the ones that are out to do harm.
Well, and again, part of it is, as Chelsey points out just a minute ago, sometimes you want to point the finger somewhere. I mean, that's just human nature. We understand that. And especially if you don't look at this from a Christian point of view, then you can't point the finger at Satan or the evil world or the fact that we're in a fallen world or human sinfulness or human depravity. So you point it at the NRA or you point it at liberal groups or whatever you might do. But, if you're really looking for finger pointing, one of the ones that surprises me that nobody's mentioned is we live in a society where we see a level of visual violence that is unprecedented in the history of Western civilization. Let's just, again, take the average person who graduates from high school. He or she will have seen 22,000 hours of television. They will have seen about 200,000 violent acts. They'll see about 18,000 televised homicides. And that's just television. You add to that the movies, you add to that the smartphones. And so then we're surprised that somebody decides to grab 24 guns, go to a hotel room and start shooting at people.
Yes, I think that that was something I'm glad you brought up, because we are seeing such an increase in violent crimes in our country. Even since, West Virginia? When I was in college, that was new and unprecedented. And since then, we've probably had a half a dozen to a dozen more public shootings. So the crime rate is definitely increasing. And I think that the dehumanizing of each other is probably a large part of that.
Is there a pattern between the shooters in the sense that, so I know the case is usually, okay, we need to do stuff like maybe for mental health and or the individuals, because if guns don't kill people but people kill people, then who are the people that we specialize on trying to care for and get help towards? But if there's not a pattern among the shooters, like history, does that make sense? Kind of,
sure.
If there was
and Virginia Tech and Aurora both are situations where you had psychologists or psychiatrists raising the concern. But San Bernardino, that's basically, and even Orlando, those are Muslims. And then you have this one. And by the way, this guy's off the charts.
Yeah, he is.
He's 64 years of age. You look at all the other shooters, none of them, usually they're in their 20s and 30s. So there's just a lot of things that don't add up. Not the least of which is his money, which somebody wants to talk about in just a minute, and some of his background. But we need to take a break, and we'll take some more of those phone calls right after this.
Chuck Bentley of Crown Financial Ministries believes you hold the key to powerful and lasting change. You can be a hero.
Are you happy with what you're seeing in our culture? Are you really pleased with the direction of this country? If you're not, then do your duty. Give. Make an investment. Put your money where your heart's desire is to make a difference.
You don't need a colorful cape and costume to be a hero. All you need is to get off the bench and into the game, and to support the fight for faith, family, and freedom. Join the team. Join Truth Team 360 with Point of View Radio. We need heroes to step up this week, today, and do what you can. Visit pointofview.net/team and choose your level of support. Be an important part of Point of View's 45-year legacy of changed lives and changed communities.
It will be a gift that pays off for eternity.
Pointofview.net/team, or give by calling 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, we'll take your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. I want to go around the roundtable in just a minute and talk about some of the resources on the websites for these individuals, but let me mention what's on the Point of View website today. First article is on religious freedom cases stacking up. This, I think, would be very helpful for you to read and also to be in prayer about, because some of these religious liberty issues we talked about in the first hour are very important going before the Supreme Court. The second one is the passionate non sequiturs of the gun debate. This is by Rich Lowry, pointing out that sometimes people are looking in the wrong places for answers, and this was very well written. Then a very long piece, Here's the Truth About Gun Control and Crime by Jarrett Stepman, that appeared in the Daily Signal. Then the one that I just alluded to by Guy Benson on this, it brings out the worst of our tribal politics. And then, of course, a lot of people have said, well, what did Jimmy Kimmel say? Is that right or wrong? David French wrote a very good piece. Jimmy Kimmel is sincerely wrong about guns. Now, the other day, we also posted that piece that a lot of you have still been quoted from and quoting from. David French's piece, based on the early reports, the last Las Vegas shooting is very, very strange. And just as we went to the break, we were talking about the fact that it is strange. It doesn't fit any of the profiles. And so one other thing that people are starting to talk about, Chelsey, is the possible radicalization of this killer. And that originally, is it tied to ISIS? Others have said maybe just radicalized because he wanted to kill conservatives, and a lot of conservatives would show up at a country western venue or whatever. But at least now they're still trying to think motive a little bit. What have you found?
Well, I did a deep dive on this, Kerby, because I was really interested. Nobody's found a motive yet, but Rukmini Kalimaki is a reporter who she specializes on ISIS recruiting and ISIS terrorist events. And ISIS has now, according to her, claimed 4 times responsibility for this. And they've doubled down. So at first it was just that they claimed responsibility. Then they gave him a name, what they call, it's a military name. They gave him a Muslim name. Mm-hmm. And then they issued a video of all of the violence that occurred, saying that, taking responsibility for it. And so the FBI has denied and said, we haven't found any evidence of that. She said that, it will inevitably show up on his phone if he was recruited in the last few months, because they have hundreds of recruiting channels that you can get on your phone. So, it's just a matter of time until we find out if that was on his phone. If he was recruited, he would be the oldest, an outlier by far from their normal recruits. He's 10 years older than their oldest American recruit, according to the FBI list. So there's just a few facts out there. ISIS is claiming responsibility. FBI says we have no evidence of that. But ISIS typically only does claim responsibility for attacks that truly their recruits have gone, with the exception, I know this summer there were 2 Manila they claimed responsibility for, and an airport bombing they declared responsibility for, and neither of those panned out. So we'll see. The jury's still out on that.
Well, again, I've seen some pictures of the room, and there looks like there's a note. Of course, she has a phone. There's a computer. Of course, they are now talking to his girlfriend, so we'll find out. Let's go around the roundtable, though, because we have links to, first of all, the Initiative Network. And Grant, again, I would highly encourage people to find out more about the Initiative Network, to maybe bring some of your speakers to their campus, their church, their business, or whatever. So talk about what's available on the website.
Yeah, so I'm writing a book. It is due soon,
Yes.
so I need to go to a cabin somewhere and finish it. But, we found that there's 3 parties we speak to a lot, usually parents that are trying to raise millennials, pastors that are trying to reach millennials, and business professionals that are trying to retain millennials. I'm growing a heart a lot for parents, though, because I probably don't go a month without a handful of parents that just come up and they have questions about their kids.
Of course.
Just yesterday, I'm leaving a conference. I got to go to another event. And this man's like, can I ask you a question? I'm like, sir, I really do have to leave. He's like, okay, I'll just walk to your car with you. And I'm in the parking lot, and he's just telling me about his kid going to a concert and this and that. I'm like, man, grown man is a great leader too, by the way. And I'm like, it might be a great leader that speaks and does all this, but his kid is really important to him. And so just starting to try to figure out, how can I share insight, based on how millennials think. It's weird. I'm a Mexican, South African, 27-year-old. So how much can I represent all millennials? But I hear what parents are and pastors and business leaders are frustrated with, and then I try to figure out the why behind the statistics.
Very good. So again, the Initiative Network, and of course we've talked a little bit about First Liberty, and again, you can get Undeniable. You can find some of the other resources, but Chelsey, if people want to know a little bit more about religious liberty, and I've noticed one of our callers wants to talk about what happens when our young kids go off to school. You do have a packet there so that you can know what your rights are when you go to school.
Yes, we have a lot of resources on firstliberty.org, which is our website, and you can look. There's teacher rights, there's student rights, there's rights of religious organizations, military rights. So go ahead and go to our resource section, and we have just an abundance of knowledge there for you guys.
Let me just mention that one of the articles a lot of people are quoting today, and I'll post it on our website tomorrow, from Leah Libresco. I used to think gun control was the answer. My research told me otherwise. We'll post that and maybe spend a little bit of time talking about that tomorrow. But all sorts of great articles on the website today. And if you find yourself in a discussion, a debate, a Facebook back and forth, and you're looking for some facts and figures and statistics, and in the case of our Facebook page there, I even posted the graph everybody's been quoting lately. All of it is available at the website, pointofview.net. Let's go back to the phones. North Carolina, WLGP. Andrea, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks, Kerby. Well, we got a little more info, don't we?
Well, we know more than we did.
Yeah, and, you know, that's very interesting what she shared about the background, because with ISIS and what they keep coming forth with, even though we can't confirm that, can we? Not yet.
Not yet.
Confirm.
We'll see. You know, truth will find its way out eventually.
Yeah, and then, but the money thing, would you share with me a little bit about how he made his money? I just want to know where that came from. I know he sent his girlfriend back to the Philippines before he did what he did in Las Vegas on a cheap airplane ticket, but what about how he's made his money? I just kind of want to know a little bit about that. An educational background. Did he even graduate from high school?
You know, I have not heard anybody talk about that. I have been hearing about some of the different kind of businesses he was in. One, even here in the Dallas area, was kind of a pool company, if I remember right, and some other houses and flipping houses and things like that. But it seems like he was kind of a pretty involved entrepreneur. Then he did spend a lot of money, make a lot of money, probably lose a lot of money gambling, because we know about his gambling debts. But it will be interesting to see what we find out there. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about where he made his money, but I'm more still curious about what that motivation is. So maybe we'll find out. So anyway, Chelsey, I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people have just wondered, is there something we're missing here? And the fact is that the very first day, one of the individuals we've interviewed on this program before, who's out there in Las Vegas, said, I think it's radicalization. And then, of course, everybody made fun of him. And now maybe we even have police chiefs and sheriffs saying that possibility. So we'll see. Let's go to Ohio and talk to Cheryl. I'd love to give as many of you a chance to express your opinion. What would you like to say?
Well, can you hear me?
I sure can.
I guess I just think all these government agencies and Jimmy Kimmels and everybody of the world that wants to get rid of the guns, and that's the problem, and that is a problem. However, just if we could go back to the 10 Commandments and just everybody do the 10 Commandments, there'd be no killing, no stealing, no looting, no adultery. I mean, 10 things is all we have to do in this life.
You know, and again, we used to post those in the public schools, and then a case called Stone versus Graham said, no, we can't post the 10 Commandments there in Kentucky, because after all, the students might look at the 10 Commandments, they might read the 10 Commandments, they might live according to the 10 Commandments. I think it's a good idea. Chelsey, I found out the other day, I know you were looking at all these cases, after the Supreme Court told them that they were supposed to take down those 10 Commandments. I heard from somebody there in Kentucky, they never took them down.
And it's a state-by-state determination, and that's all I'm going to say about that.
I think we'll go on to that. And let's get to a case that you do want to talk to. Tammy in Arizona on Family Life Radio. I think you had some questions about your daughter going to school and her faith. Talk about that, if you might.
Yeah, I went to school as a nurse several years ago, and had to stand up for my faith by telling the dean that we are going to have a club here. It is going to be named Koinonia. We are going to meet once a week. And she had told me to check my religion at the door. I said, ma'am, it's not a religion. It's a relationship, and I won't do that. And now I see my grandchildren going to school, and I feel as though in their pursuit to happiness, others' rights are superseding theirs because they're saying they can't take their Bible to school. Well, excuse me, if we would all just do what the last caller said and do what Christ said in Surmise of the Ten Commandments, and treat each other the way we want to be treated, you know, how we need to be treating people properly.
Good.
If we would just do that, everything would be okay.
Well, we're going to come back and get Chelsey's answer to that. What rights do students have when they go to school? We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Maria Nolan and St. Anne Catholic School had a falling out. Nolan thinks her religious employer fired her from her job as principal of the school for speaking out against what she viewed as racial discrimination. The Diocese of Birmingham, Alabama, that operates St. Anne's, said that Nolan simply wasn't the right person to advance their religious mission. Nolan's responsibilities were pretty clear. As principal, she was responsible for implementing an educational atmosphere charged with the Catholic beliefs of her employer. That included monitoring lesson plans to make sure the teaching of the church was reflected in the lessons of the classroom, leading school prayers, and organizing religious activities for the students and the faculty. The court quickly determined that there was little doubt that Nolan's role as principal falls within the general ambit of the ministerial exception. Although she lacked the formal title of minister, her role clearly conveyed the church's message and carried out its mission. Therefore, the court could not interfere with what amounts to a decision by a religious body as to who best perpetuates its religious message and mission. The ministerial exception is an important doctrine that protects the unique aspects of a religious employer, giving relief to religious organizations from the rigors of employment law that may hamper their unique religious mission. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and if you'd like to join us, we might slip in one more phone call, but around the round table, we have Grant and Chelsey. And Chelsey, this one obviously goes to you. First of all, she talked about having a club, and there was a very important case years ago that came through the Supreme Court, and this was a case that simply said, look, if you have a ski club or a debate club or a chess club, then you can't say you can't have a Bible club. And so she was successful there. But it sounds like now the grandchildren are not even allowed to bring their Bible to school. What about that?
Right. So that is what we call, there's a rule of neutrality. So the Supreme Court has held they have to be neutral towards religion. That doesn't mean favor it, but that also doesn't mean disfavor it. And so if a student is allowed during free period to read Vogue magazine, they're also allowed to read the Bible. There has to be neutrality towards religion. Otherwise, it's religious discrimination, viewpoint discrimination. So if you have a potential case, if you've thought of what we've talked about today and think maybe you have a potential case, call us at firstliberty.org or go to www.firstliberty.org and submit a request for legal help. And we can help get you resources, or if you have a potential case, maybe take it up, take a look at it.
So when you run into some of these situations and these cases, the first action item should be to stand up for your religious liberty. When I had you on last week, we talked about the Coons cheerleaders. Now, again, some of our listeners might not remember this, so let me try to go through and you can explain if I mess it up. That these girls just said, well, lots of times we have a banner and the football team runs through it. And it sure seems to me that maybe we could put Bible verses on the banner. And so it's our paper and it's our ink and it's our paint and it's our voices. And yet the courts, well, first of all, the school, then the court said, no, you can't do that. Well, you eventually won. But these girls now are in college. They could have said, oh, okay, I guess we won't fight this in the courts. But they decided to do so, and they've been fighting it for, 5 years? So part of the answer to some of the problems is we're going to lose our religious liberty if we don't stand up for them.
That's right. Our clients are so brave because they understand that concept, that the minute you don't stand up for your rights is the minute that you don't have them anymore. And now that we have a precedent on the books, that's going to protect so many students across the state of Texas, if not broader, that precedent will be looked towards. And that's now a clearly established right. Okay, cheerleaders or other people of other clubs, if it's student speech and they write it out on a banner, it's protected speech and they don't lose their rights just because they go into the courthouse.
So again, just a couple of things to remember if you want to. And as we're winding down our conversation today, we've posted a couple of these articles, but it just, I think, illustrates again for the fact that I saw one article today said, somebody said, what do we do about gun control? And he said, nothing. And his argument was a pretty good one. When there's a lot of emotion and a lot of back and forth, that's probably the worst time to make a policy. So it seems to me that sometimes we need to have some honest discussions. And Grant, one of the things I know that you've tried to do is try to build some bridges and try to reach out and try to hear and listen to what other people are saying. Because after all, if you think about it, Jesus probably asked more questions than he made statements. And if Jesus asked questions and solicited comments, and also help people sometimes see the error of their ways by asking questions, maybe we should learn the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, one is you don't get to humanize the issue if you constantly or immediately go into an argument. Maybe even think, if the families were in this room to hear the conversation, would they be shocked that we're talking about it, or would they feel like there's care about our situation? Another thing I thought of, I go on a lot of mission trips, and I heard this advice to millennials, but I think it's just kind of relevant in general with what we're talking about. It was a pastor saying, hey, okay, young people, you guys are going to another country. You're going to see a lot of culture shock and see all these things changes. Here's what we tell you with wisdom. Do not in the next 48 hours or even a week make any major life decisions. Don't go and quit your job. Don't go and break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend. Don't go and move to another country. Definitely don't come back and tell all the Americans that they live this way and that way, because 2 weeks ago, before you went to this country, you didn't think all that and you didn't have all that passion. Just like let God move in your heart and really really think about things and consider things. They even gave you like a journal to ask the right questions to really process this. And then you're going to have a wise decision. But don't go guns blazing.
That's for sure. One of the articles we posted here by Guy Benson said we've developed a post-shooting playbook under which millions of Americans rush to their ideological battle stations to rage at each other long before they've completed the human process of grappling with heart sickness. And so, again, whether it's you are in the midst of an emotional decision, you just lost your job, you've broken up with your girlfriend, you're going through a divorce, you're going to a third world country, or you're just watching, in this case, a tragedy, just an unprecedented tragedy, the largest tragedy we've ever faced in terms of a mass shooting. And then to rush to your ideological battle stations, there's a lot of wisdom in maybe sitting back, thinking about that, praying about it before you say anything.
Yeah, I think one thing that really put this in perspective for me is a Facebook friend of mine was at the concert with a few friends. He and his friends made it out alive and okay, and he put up a picture of his wristband and said, I don't know when to take this off. And to think through that they're still grappling with what happened, that they're alive. They're still having to call family members and say, I'm okay. You know, this is a time for healing. This is a time to get people help and counseling for grief as for them individually and as a country. I mean, I think we just have to slow down a little bit and acknowledge that's questions people are still having.
I think so. Again, let me just mention that next Wednesday will be the Millennial Roundtable, and Nick will be back in this chair. I will actually be teaching at a Bible school next week, and so I teach creation for the first-year students and homosexuality for the second-year students. Well, now it's become homosexuality, sexual ethics, transgender, and all the other issues, so the second-year students. So I'll be out for a little bit, but at the same time, I know you guys will do a good job here. But just one more time around the roundtable, as people go to the Initiative Network, Grant, talk about what's available and what people will find when they land on the website.
Yeah, if you're a church and you would like us to just do a workshop, maybe you're a church that has young people coming in and or want to reach more young people, we do workshops and we come speak on Sunday. And you can go to initiativenetwork.org. My social media is Grant Skeldon, just my name, with a K. Yeah, that's it.
Pretty simple.
And I'm Chelsey Youman with First Liberty Institute. We are the largest nonprofit in the country dedicated exclusively to defending religious liberty. So go to firstliberty.org to hear more about us.
Again, we've posted a couple of the articles. The first article there on religious liberty freedom cases, I would encourage you to get that, to maybe pass it around. It is, again, written by our good friend John Stonestreet, but this is a matter of real prayer. How this case comes down is going to either make Chelsey's life and Kelly Shackelford's life a lot easier or a lot harder. So we'll see where that goes. Then we have ones on the non sequiturs, which I thought was very well written by Rich Lowry of the gun debate, which you might want to read. One on gun control and crime, which really kind of covers everything, and it gives you a chance to even to see some of this Facebook post and the Twitter feeds from all sorts of different sides. Then one on Jimmy Kimmel and crime, because this one is very important, and that one's written by David French, and of course you have some others as well. And then one called Tribal Politics, which I quoted from just a minute ago by Guy Benson. And if you want to find the earlier one on how the Las Vegas shooting is very, very strange, I might encourage you to read that one as well, because we're still trying to figure it out, and maybe we'll know in a few more days. So all of those are pieces that are available on the website. As you go through the website, don't forget that you can also, of course, sign up for my Viewpoints commentary. We have a banner on that, and the one today is on restricting free speech, but each one of those is available to you to post on your website, start a conversation, and get involved in that way as well. And also, if you would consider what you might do to support this ministry, we are listener-supported and dependent upon your financial gifts to bring this program to you. So if you can go to the website, click on the button that says Donate Now. We suggest either a one-time gift or maybe you'd like to give on a regular basis for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. You can be one of our Truth Team members, and there are all sorts of benefits that come by supporting this ministry. I want to thank Doug and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Dr. Reg Grant in studio with us tomorrow. Looking forward to that. We'll see you then.
In an age of fake news, getting good information is vital. Point of View works to bring you that each and every day. But as Diane in Arkansas illustrates, passing that information along, educating others, is something you can help with. Diane is a college professor. She influences the next generation, and she wrote, "Thank you for your informative letter. I used some of your quotes when I was teaching the Declaration of Independence in my literature class." Diane, like so many, hopefully like you, is taking what she received from Point of View in letters, online, through our app, on the air, and rebuilding truth in this post-truth culture. All of that takes a team. Join the Truth Team at Point of View. Find out how you can help at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. Show your commitment. Make a difference today, right now. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.